Robert had been traveling across the country, speaking passionately about wildlife conservation and honoring the extraordinary legacy of his father, Steve Irwin. Every interview up until now had followed a familiar rhythm. The hosts were warm, the questions were thoughtful, and Robert's natural charm, sincerity, and quiet confidence always won audiences over. But this time was different. The moment Robert stepped onto the stage of The View, he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The applause felt routine rather than welcoming. The smiles didn't quite reach the eyes. And sitting across from him, Joy Behar wore an expression that was sharp, calculating, almost predatory. The other hosts seemed unusually restrained, their body language tense, as if they knew something the audience didn't. Robert, ever professional, waved politely and took his seat. His posture was relaxed, his expression open. Years of media training had prepared him for tough questions, but not for what was about to unfold. "Welcome back to The View," Joy began, her tone pleasant on the surface but edged with something colder underneath. "We're here with Robert Irwin, wildlife conservationist and son of the late Steve Irwin. Now, Robert, I have to ask you something that's been on my mind." Robert nodded calmly. "Of course. Anything." Joy leaned forward slightly. "I've seen your interviews, your documentaries, your whole public image. And I can't help but wonder, aren't you just riding on your father's coattails? What have you actually accomplished on your own?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The studio audience fell silent. Cameras zoomed in. For just a split second, Robert's smile faltered, not in anger but in recognition. He had heard this before. But he recovered quickly. "I understand why people might think that," he replied evenly. "But I've been involved in wildlife conservation my entire life. I've helped rescue thousands of animals. I've worked on breeding programs for endangered species. I've dedicated myself to continuing important conservation work, because it matters." Joy didn't soften. "That's exactly my point." She pressed, her voice sharpening. "You're continuing his work. Where's your original contribution? Sometimes it feels like you're just wearing khakis and playing Steve Irwin. Don't you think it's time to step out of his shadow?" The other hosts shifted uncomfortably. The tension was now unmistakable. Robert inhaled slowly. "Conservation," he said carefully, "isn't about personal branding. It's not about ego. It's about protecting animals and ecosystems that are disappearing every day. Whether I'm building on my father's work or carving out my own path, the mission remains the same." Joy rolled her eyes. "On live television? Oh, please. That sounds nice. But maybe you're afraid to try something different. Maybe you know you wouldn't stand out without the Irwin name. You're 20 years old, Robert. When are you going to grow up and stop playing with animals?" That was the moment everything changed. The polite, media-ready smile vanished. His jaw tightened, his posture straightened, and when he spoke again his voice carried something deeper, not anger but conviction. "Playing with animals," he repeated quietly, his Australian accent growing stronger with emotion. "Do you know what that actually involves?" He leaned forward now. "Last month, I helped rescue a mother koala and her joey from a bushfire. I've worked on breeding programs that reintroduced species into habitats where they'd been extinct for decades. I've assisted in wildlife hospitals that have treated over 100,000 injured animals." He paused, letting the weight of that settle. "You want to talk about growing up? I grew up watching my father relocate venomous snakes so families wouldn't get hurt. I grew up understanding that conservation isn't a hobby. It's a responsibility." The audience was completely silent. But Joy made a fatal miscalculation. "I understand you're emotional," she said, her tone turning condescending. "But emotion doesn't change the facts. The fact is, you're famous because your father was famous. Without that name, you'd just be another guy in a zoo. Maybe it's time you found a real career." Robert went still, completely still. And then softly, "Do you know what my father was doing when he died?" The question landed like thunder. Joy blinked. For the first time she looked uncertain. "He was filming a documentary about stingrays." Robert continued, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "Not for fame, not for money, but to help people understand that even misunderstood animals deserve respect. He died doing what he believed in, protecting creatures that can't speak for themselves." Joy attempted to interrupt. "Robert, I didn't mean—" "No," he said firmly. "Let me finish." The authority in his voice stunned the room. "You call this not a real career. You call it playing. But every day, species are disappearing. Climate change is accelerating extinction. If standing up for wildlife isn't real work, what is?" His eyes were calm now. Clear. "I'm proud to carry my father's legacy. But I'm not living in his shadow. I'm walking beside his memory, and building something that matters." The studio was silent for several long seconds, and then, slowly, applause began. Not polite applause, earned applause. Because in that moment, Robert Irwin wasn't just Steve Irwin's son, he was his own man, The shift in Robert's tone was unmistakable now. "You want to talk about real careers," he said, his voice steady but burning underneath. "You want to talk about what matters." He leaned forward, eyes locked on Joy. "My father could have made millions doing circus-style shows with crocodiles. He could have turned Australia Zoo into a flashy theme park built purely for entertainment. He could have cashed in on fame and spectacle." Robert shook his head. "But he didn't. He chose education. He chose research. He chose conservation. He chose to use his platform to make people care about wildlife." The camera cut briefly to Joy's face. The confidence she had worn so easily minutes earlier was gone. In its place was something far less certain. She had expected a polite young guest, a soft-spoken 20-year-old she could needle without consequence. Instead, she was facing someone raised under relentless public scrutiny. Someone who understood media better than she assumed. Someone who knew exactly how to turn attention into impact. "And you know what, Joy?" Robert continued. "Every single day I wake up trying to live up to that standard. Not because I'm riding coattails, but because the work matters." His voice grew firmer. "Do you know how many species have gone extinct in the time it took for us to have this conversation? Do you understand that there are animals alive today because of conservation programs my family helped build?" Across the table, Whoopi Goldberg finally tried to intervene. "Robert, we appreciate your passion, and I think what Joy was trying to say." "No, Whoopi," Robert replied, never breaking eye contact with Joy. "I know exactly what she was trying to say." The studio went still again. "She was trying to diminish my work. She was trying to reduce conservation to playing with animals. She implied that because I'm young, and because I care deeply about wildlife, my work somehow isn't serious." Joy straightened in her chair, clearly aware that control of the interview had slipped from her grasp. "Robert, I think you're overreacting," she said, her tone shifting from aggressive to defensive. "I was asking legitimate questions about your career path." "Legitimate?" Robert's composure cracked not into chaos but into sharp clarity. "You told me to stop playing dress up in khakis. You told me to find a real career. Would you say that to David Attenborough? Would you tell Jane Goodall to get a real job?" A ripple moved through the audience. A few audible murmurs. Heads shaking. Joy pivoted quickly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was trying to explore whether young people in your position feel pressured to follow in their parents' footsteps." "No," Robert shot back immediately. "There's no misunderstanding. You said I was afraid to step out from behind my father's reputation. You said I don't have what it takes to make it on my own. That's not a question about pressure. That's an attack." The other hosts avoided eye contact. The tension was suffocating. "You want to talk about pressure?" Robert continued. "The pressure isn't living up to my father's name. The pressure is sitting here listening to someone who hasn't done 5 minutes of research about my work telling me it doesn't matter." Joy flushed. "Now wait just a minute. Mo, you wait." The authority in his voice stunned the room. "I've been respectful. I've answered every question, even the ones clearly designed to belittle me. But I will not sit here and let you insult my father's memory or dismiss work that literally saves lives." Joy tried to recover. "I never insulted your father's memory." Robert's eyebrows lifted. "You said I was pretending to be him. You said I was hiding behind his reputation. If that's not diminishing his legacy, what is?" She opened her mouth to respond, but Robert pressed on. "And here's what really bothers me. You're attacking a 20-year-old who has dedicated his life to conservation, while you make a living delivering hot takes on television." The control room must have been in chaos. The audience didn't dare breathe. "You want to talk about making a difference?" Robert continued. "How many animals have you helped protect? How many species have you worked to save? How many young people have you inspired to care about something bigger than themselves?" Joy's expression hardened. "You know what, Robert? Maybe I touched a nerve. Maybe not everyone thinks you're special just because of your last name." That was it. The transformation was instant. Robert's hands gripped the chair arms so tightly his knuckles turned white. His jaw set. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Special because of my last name." He slowly stood. The movement alone sent a visible wave of alarm across the table. "Joy," he said evenly, "do you have any idea what you just implied?" She started to backtrack. "Robert, I think we should." "No," he said firmly. "You just told me that the only reason people respect my work is because of my surname." He took a breath, not to calm down, but to focus. "My last name didn't drag injured koalas out of burning forests. My last name didn't spend sleepless nights in wildlife hospitals. My last name didn't help build breeding programs that brought species back from the brink of extinction." He placed his hand flat on the table. "I did that. With a team. With experts. With scientists. With rangers. With people who don't care about television ratings, they care about survival." His voice softened slightly, but the intensity remained. If my last name opens doors, I use those doors to fight for animals who can't fight for themselves. If that makes me special, it's because I chose to make it count. The studio was frozen in stunned silence, and for the first time since the interview began, Joy Behar had absolutely nothing to say. It reminds me exactly why I do this. Robert's voice no longer trembled with anger, it burned with purpose. You say I'm special because of my last name, my father's name, the name of a man who died trying to help people understand animals instead of fear them. He took a step back from the table, not retreating, commanding the space. So let me tell you what that name actually means to me. The studio lights felt hotter. The cameras didn't dare cut away. Every lens was locked on him. That name means waking up at 4 in the morning, because a wombat went into labor early and nature doesn't wait for TV schedules. It means bottle, feeding orphan joeys through the night. It means learning how to read the tension in a crocodile's tail, because one wrong move could cost you your life. His accent thickened as emotion pushed past polish. It means watching your dad get bitten, scratched, charged, and never once hearing him blame the animal, because he understood something people like you don't seem to. Joy tried to interject. Robert, please, sit down. I'm not sitting down. He fired back. You wanted this conversation. So let's have it properly. The room was electric now. That name you think makes me privileged, he continued. It also means growing up knowing millions of people are waiting for you to fail. Waiting to say you're not as good. Waiting to prove that legacy is too heavy for your shoulders. He pressed a hand to his chest. It means carrying the expectations of a man who changed how the world saw wildlife conservation. It means understanding that every documentary, every rescue, every interview has to count. Across the table, even the other hosts were silent. No one wanted to break the moment. But here's what you don't understand, Robert said, his voice rising. I am not ashamed of that name, I'm proud of it, and I'm not hiding behind it, I'm honoring it. He began pacing slowly now, measured, controlled. Every time someone says I'm riding coattails, it reminds me why the mission matters. Every time someone tells me to find a real career, it reminds me how many people still think conservation is optional. He turned back to her. Let me be clear, species are disappearing faster than at any point in human history. Habitats are being destroyed every single day. Climate change isn't a debate topic, it's a lived reality for the animals we rescue. His eyes were steady, focused. If my last name opens a door to talk about that on national television, then I'll use it. If it gets one kid to care about protecting wildlife instead of chasing fame, then it's worth it. His voice softened, but it carried even more weight. My dad didn't die for a brand. He didn't build a legacy so his son could be famous. He did it so people would care. A pause. And if you think that's not a real career, then maybe the problem isn't my path. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was stunned. Because this wasn't a young man defending a surname anymore. This was someone defending a mission. And for the first time since the interview began, the conversation wasn't about legacy. It was about purpose.